It is Friday, March 2nd, and this is The National.
Tonight, Canada and the United States stealing for conflict. Donald Trump says trade wars are good. Justin Trudeau says U.S. tariffs are unacceptable.
Millions are in the path of a monster storm, a so-called bomb cyclone. U.S. officials are warning it's life and death. And Hollywood prepares for its night of nights in the wake of Me Too and Time's Up. But what's really changed in the industry?
Good news for the American worker or the start of an international trade war. Donald Trump's threat to slap tariffs on imported steel and aluminum is being met with criticism around the world, including here at home.
We regard the imposition of any new tariffs or any tariffs on steel or aluminum between our two countries as absolutely unacceptable.
Canada faces the biggest impact from new duties, and in a moment we'll talk about the government's plan to fight back if we are indeed hit with Trump's tariffs. We'll also look at whether those duties will hurt more American jobs than they actually help. But that possibility and even a massive plunge in the stock markets isn't dissuading the president from doubling down on the protectionist rhetoric. Trump may think trade wars are easy to win, but much of the planet does not, including many Trump loyalists. As Lindsay Duncombe explains, they're worried about retaliation and what it could mean for the American economy.
D.C. was paralyzed today by blasting, churning winds, fitting somehow as the American economy braces for impact. These tariffs could hurt.
It's going to turn around and bite American citizens with much higher taxes, much higher costs, and it's going to discombobulate our whole international trading system.
Trump's plan would raise steel prices domestically, good for steel companies, bad for every other company that uses steel, from car manufacturers to beer brewers to retailers. The message today was this plan will cost Americans money and jobs. The Wall Street Journal went so far as to call it the biggest blunder of Trump's presidency. Retaliation is a big concern. Country after country after country, including Canada, came out against the plan. The European Union vowing to slap 25% tariffs on the most American of exports: motorcycles, bourbon, blue jeans.
The EU will react firmly and commensurately to defend our interests.
This is a can of Campbell's soup.
Armed with props, the Commerce Secretary argued any price increase would be minimal.
This is scare tactics by the people who want the status quo.
And the president seemed to welcome the storm of criticism, tweeting, "Trade wars are good and easy to win." Not quite, according to trade experts.
He was born yesterday. Nobody wins a trade war, right? Trade wars are just, they're wars. We're going to destroy your cost structure. We're going to reduce your personal income. You're going to do the same to us.
Another reason why this proposal has rattled so many industries is so far, Donald Trump's trade moves haven't lived up to his protectionist bluster. And there's concern this could just be the start. Lindsay Duncombe, CBC News, Washington.
And caught in the middle of all this, Canadian steel and aluminum makers facing the prospect of hefty tariffs and a trade war. But as Susan Lund shows us, right now, their hands are just tied.
In the heart of Steel Town, people are waiting anxiously.
I'm a little worried. There seems to be some bravery on the part of the company, but it's not necessarily us. I mean, it's our suppliers too, right?
Others think it's just Trump's way of getting a better NAFTA deal.
No, I'm not worried. Not at all. No, in fact, I don't even think he's going to come out with it next week. I think he's going to say, I need a little bit more time to talk this out. I mean, he's a negotiator.
A local union rep says tough times are ahead if Canada doesn't get an exemption.
I'd say that it would cause mass chaos if tariffs were imposed, and especially, there will likely be some type of retaliation.
The president of one of Canada's biggest unions, Unifor, is at the NAFTA talks in Mexico and says there's only one retaliation that will work.
The Canadian government has to say to the United States, if you don't exempt us from the tariffs on steel and aluminum, then we're walking away from NAFTA, and we are going to be punitive as well.
The Prime Minister was asked today what he's doing to make sure Canada is exempt from these tariffs.
We will continue to engage with all levels of the American administration in the coming days so that they understand that this proposal is unacceptable.
Senior government officials say Trudeau has not spoken with Trump since news of these duties came out yesterday. No phone call is planned, but the government says it is preparing.
We reserve the right to take responsive measures to defend our trade interests and Canadian workers.
The Canadian Steel Producers Association is also worried about what happens to steel from countries that are affected by the tariff.
Those volumes of steel would come to Canada and could potentially swamp our domestic market.
Cabinet ministers are reaching out to repeat Canada's request to be exempt, and the government says it's looking at all options. Susan Lunn, CBC News, Ottawa.
Now, Trump's own arguments for trade barriers seem to be mostly about jobs and economic growth in the United States. But trade experts warn that the tariffs could actually do more harm than good. And they only need point to President George W. Bush to show why.
We believe the actions that the president is taking today can help restore the strength and profitability of this very important American industry.
In 2002, Bush slapped tariffs of up to 30% on some steel products, but the plan had the exact opposite effect on the economy. By trying to help the steel industry, it ended up hurting much bigger ones.
The losers are any company that buys steel, and that means they're going to pass those costs on to their customers.
Millions of jobs depend on using metal, like construction and the auto industry, compared to the only 100,000 or so steel workers. The impact of higher steel prices destroyed more jobs than those it was meant to protect. In fact, one study found 200,000 jobs lost in the U.S. because of the 2002 tariffs. Workers laid off in every single state. The Bush White House withdrew those duties a year later, admitting they had backfired.
Safeguards unavoidably impose some additional costs on consumers.
The tariffs then were different, as was the state of the economy. But 15 years later, the concerns about the tariffs are the same. So, Andrew, the days ahead will likely see this full court press from this country and others to get Trump to believe that tariffs aren't the answer. Meanwhile, you've been following the developments in the Tina Fontaine case today.
Yeah, Rosie, Winnipeg's police chief spoke publicly for the first time about the Raymond Cormier verdict. And you may recall he was acquitted in the death of Tina Fontaine just over a week ago. That was something that outraged the Indigenous community that had been watching so closely. Fontaine was just 15 years old in the custody of child welfare when she vanished in 2014. Here's Karen Pauls on the reaction to what the police chief had to say.
Tina Fontaine's body was pulled from the Red River in 2014, 72 pounds, wrapped in a duvet cover and weighted down with rocks.
It's like a river of death, like a river of darkness, a place where perpetrators can dispose of Indigenous women and girls and basically get away with it.
Not once in my life have I ever seen justice inside.
8 days ago, Raymond Cormier was acquitted of second-degree murder in Fontaine's death. Hundreds of people took to the streets to demand changes, saying Fontaine was a victim not only of murder, but of a society that failed to protect the vulnerable teenager in its care.
It doesn't become a cold case per se.
Today, Winnipeg's police chief says he was disappointed at the verdict.
I think the evidence we gathered was reasonable to charge Raymond Cormier. It just didn't reach the standard for conviction.
But Danny Smythe feels his department did all it could in an investigation that took more than a year and cost nearly $1 million.
We'll review the case, see if there's anything that was missed. But at this point, there is nothing further for us to follow up on.
The Crown has until March 22nd to appeal. This expert says any appeal would have to come from an error in law in the judge's instructions to the jury.
The deliberations and the reasons for the decision of the jury are secret, so the Crown has no way to comment on that, and the Crown would be foolish if they launched an appeal when there were no reasonable grounds for it to succeed.
There's a lot of questions as to how the investigation was done, whether it was done thoroughly, and how the justice system ultimately failed Tina and her family as well.
Hilda Anderson-Piers wants Fontaine's case turned over to the joint RCMP Winnipeg Police Task Force called Project Devote. It investigates unsolved homicides and missing persons cases.
I'm worried about it because, you know, obviously there's a perpetrator still out there.
And right now, that trail has gone cold. Karen Pauls, CBC News, Winnipeg.
Now, that task force Karen just mentioned, Project Devote, takes on investigations based on 5 criteria, all indicating a vulnerable lifestyle: substance abuse, transient behavior, hitchhiking, mental health issues, or involvement in the sex trade. Once a case is accepted, a special liaison officer keeps family members updated on what's happening in the investigation and answers any questions they may have. Well, it'll be spring in less than 3 weeks, but winter has a brutal message for millions of people on both sides of the Atlantic tonight. The season ain't over yet. That is Brooklyn. Gives you a sense of the power of the bomb cyclone. And this is what it looked like from above as it barreled into the United States this morning. It is the most significant storm to smash into the Northeast since January. At that time, the powerful storm system covered almost the entire East Coast in snow. So who knows what this one will do? After tearing into the U.S. East Coast this morning, the storm is cutting a swath of misery from Maine to Virginia. With about 80 million people in its path, it is unleashing snow, rain, sometimes both at once, along with exceptionally strong winds. Hundreds of thousands of people lost power in several states today, and thousands of flights have been canceled across the Northeast, though certainly some air travelers now wish that decision had come sooner. Just a glimpse of what high winds can do. One pilot's report from the Capital Region this morning said pretty much everyone on the plane threw up. Pilots were on the verge of throwing up. And the extreme weather has been no kinder to wildlife. Look at this video from a bald eagle's nest in D.C. Just trying to ride it out. There are problems closer to the ground, too. Millions of Americans are now under a coastal flood warning from high seas and storm surges, now threatening communities from New Jersey to Massachusetts. And whether it's from state governors or federal officials, the message to winter-weary Americans is the same. Take this storm seriously. Meanwhile, at least 21 people have died as a result of extreme winter storms in Europe. And today, it was especially rough in the UK and Northern Europe. That's where Storm Emma has collided with a nasty weather system out of Siberia known as the Beast from the East. Dublin, normally pretty mild at this time of year, was painful just to look at earlier this evening. But it was even worse last night. And it's been like this across the continent for days. Unsurprisingly, thousands of flights have been canceled at airports all over Europe, and traffic of just about every kind's been crippled. Roads, highways, even rail lines have been facing shutdowns. So, Rosie, not a pretty picture out there. Storm cleanup will be high on the agenda overseas, but also that's a pretty packed agenda in that part of the world, huh?
It is, because people across the UK are going to be watching their mailboxes pretty closely in the coming weeks. I'm serious. Now that Prince Harry and Meghan Markle have decided to invite hundreds and hundreds of people just like you and I, average folk, to share their wedding day. Today, Kensington Palace said the couple wants members of the public to feel part of the celebrations on May 19th. So they're going to ask 2,600 people to the grounds of Windsor Castle to watch the wedding party's arrival and departure from St. George's Chapel. The lucky invitees will include 1,200 members of the general public from all walks of life and every corner of the UK. 200 people from charities supported by the couple, 100 local school children, more than 600 community members, and 530 royal staffers. That's on top of the approximately 800 people who will be invited inside the chapel for the wedding service. That guest list is yet to be announced. We probably shouldn't hold our breath. But the big question is, can you actually invite Barack Obama, who is sort of buddies with Harry, and not Donald Trump? That is really a tough question to answer.
Right, and perhaps more importantly, who has to actually make that decision, right? And wear that? I mean, wouldn't
The Queen.
want to be that person.
It has to be. It must be the Queen.
I guess so. Okay, meantime, here's what else we're working on tonight on The National. Vigilant and ready. David Common takes us inside the American Air Force bomber ready to drop a nuclear weapon on North Korea.
Repairing a divided country, Theresa May lays out a plan to leave the EU and reunite the UK.
And while they roll out the red carpet for Sunday's Academy Awards, we ask, what has the Me Too movement really changed?
It would be a blessing if, when I'm older, we won't have to talk about these things anymore.
Got out and we smelled, it kind of smelled like some sort of chemical or rubber burning. It escalated very quickly. In about 4 minutes, the whole condo construction site was on fire.
Well, tonight on The National, we're tracking a major fire in Mississauga, Ontario. It broke out this evening at a construction zone, and it's created some big problems in the area tonight. Some homes have been evacuated, other residents have been told to shelter in place. And right now, roughly 1,100 homes are without power. At this point, no reports of anyone being hurt, and the cause is under investigation. In Burkina Faso, the government says coordinated attacks in the capital have left 8 people dead and dozens more injured. Gunmen targeted the country's military headquarters and the French embassy. Witnesses reported hearing gunfire and explosions. Now, so far, there's been no claim of responsibility, but the country has been targeted by an al-Qaeda-affiliated group in the past. And Italians will head to the polls on Sunday, and it's anything but clear who the next prime minister will be. Polls taken before a blackout period suggest the center-right coalition has the most support. And a key figure in that coalition, 81-year-old former prime minister Silvio Berlusconi. But he's barred from holding public office because of a tax fraud conviction. Conversely, the ruling Democratic Party and the center-left is expected to take a hit.
British Prime Minister Theresa May rattled a few teacups today in a speech about Brexit. The deadline for the UK's departure from the EU is just over a year away now, and May laid out her economic vision for a post-Brexit relationship with Europe.
I want to be straight with people, because the reality is that we all need to face up to some hard facts. We're leaving the single market. Life is going to be different. In certain ways, our access to each other's markets will be less than it is now.
May warned Brexit supporters that to a certain extent, the UK will still be affected by judicial decisions in the EU. She said the UK would keep many regulations in step with EU laws, and she would like the UK to retain membership in many European regulatory agencies. Well, as Thomas Degla tells us, all that did not sit well with Brexit hardliners, while their opponents are wondering if it's too late to call the whole thing off.
You can have a cake. A culinary campaign against Brexit.
Prime Minister, do you want your cake and eat it? No.
Greeting Theresa May with treats in hand and Britain's future in mind. EU supporters eager to hear the Prime Minister offer specifics on how this country plans to leave.
Essentially, she wants to be able to have her cake and eat it. She wants all the benefits of EU membership, but none of the obligations.
What she does want from Brexit negotiations, she laid out in new detail today. A custom trade agreement with Europe, no hard border between the UK and Ireland, which is staying in the EU, and perhaps most pressingly, she wants this.
We must bring our country back together, taking into account the views of everyone who cares about this issue from both sides of the debate.
But it's hard to reconcile two sides that won't budge. As a webcast and website, Westmonster speaks for the hardest of the hard Brexiteers.
Got Peter on Facebook. Thank you for your comment, Peter, saying May's backtracking again.
With a modest setup, these guys say they get an audience of thousands, most of them unwilling to water down Brexit.
We've had a vote, a historic vote, one that many people thought we'd never get. We got it, we won that vote, we want to see that delivered now.
On the opposite side, former political leaders like ex-Deputy Prime Minister Nick Clegg.
There's a danger that the whole project of Brexit collapses under the weight of its own contradictions.
Re-entering the spotlight to say there's still a way to stop this.
More and more people are developing doubts about the wisdom of Brexit in the first place.
As it stands, though, in a year's time, even those who want to stay in the EU will end up leaving. Thomas Stagg, CBC News, London.
Still ahead on The National, it's been a charged and changed award season. So what does the Me Too movement mean for the Oscars? Our arts and culture panel will weigh in.
And 2 Canadians are among National Geographic's Adventurers of the Year. And what a year it's been.
I feel like we're always talking within this fantastic echo chamber where everybody likes and loves what we do. And every once in a while, when you post something that creates a little bit of controversy, then you step out into the dark web and the trolls come out.
More fallout in the wake of the Larry Nassar sex abuse scandal. Olympic gymnast Ellie Raceman is suing the U.S. Olympic Committee and USA Gymnastics. The 3-time gold medalist is accusing them of failing to protect her and other athletes from the former team doctor. Raceman was one of nearly 200 girls and women to speak out about abuse at Nassar's sentencing hearing. In addition to those allegations, we're learning tonight about the first known male complainant. University of Michigan gymnast Jacob Moore has filed a lawsuit alleging that Nassar sexually harassed and abused him in 2016. Nassar is currently in prison after being sentenced to at least 40 years for sexual abuse. In Ontario tonight, a Grammy-nominated choir conductor is on leave after being accused of sexual misconduct. Noel Edison is the longtime conductor of the Toronto Mendelssohn Choir and the Elora Singers. He was placed on a leave of absence this week after reports that a number of male complainants had made allegations. In a joint statement, officials from both choirs said they were shocked and that an independent investigation is now underway. That sort of allegation will be top of mind on Sunday when the world tunes in to the Oscars. Just like any year, the red carpet was rolled out today ahead of Sunday night's Academy Awards. But this is not just any year for Hollywood. After an avalanche of sexual misconduct allegations brought down powerful men and ushered in the era of Me Too.
For too long, women have not been heard or believed if they dared to speak their truth to the power of those men. But their time is up.
The somber tone for awards was set at the Golden Globes when stars wore black in solidarity with the anti-harassment movement Time's Up. This week, the issue still dominates the zeitgeist. We'll have more on the Oscars in just a moment, but first, with Hollywood's dark side exposed for all to see, has the industry actually changed? Kim Brunhuber asked some actors what they've seen.
Sarah Chaudhry doesn't get nervous. Excited, yes, she says, but not nervous. Not when you've been acting since the age of 6. Nervous, that's for rookies. Except
I'm a tiny little bit nervous today because I have to give a little speech in front of all the Canadian Oscar nominees, so that's a little nerve-wracking.
But at that morning's Los Angeles luncheon, the 13-year-old from Toronto will likely be received as a peer.
Market sellers won't risk serving you.
Chaudhry stars as the voice of Parvana, the main character in the Oscar-nominated animated feature film The Breadwinner, a Canadian co-production based on a Canadian novel about an 11-year-old girl living under Taliban rule in Afghanistan. This Oscar season, while her friends were hanging at the mall, she was posing with the film's producer Angelina Jolie. But it's a sad indictment of show business that this teen has already learned one of Hollywood's brutal truths. Some men can be creeps. She's already encountered, in her words, a couple of shady situations that she didn't want to talk about. Luckily, Mom and Dad were never far away.
They definitely keep me safe from anything that may happen in the industry.
But they won't be chaperoning her forever.
The bride's my sister.
Oh, your little sister's getting married.
Yeah.
Canadian Renee Percy has been acting since she debuted on Degrassi High almost 30 years ago now. She says she's been harassed too many times to count, once allegedly by a director who's now been accused by dozens of other women. Whenever she complained, Percy says, it was swept under the rug.
It's as if it's,
you know, a character trait, or he was born with this extra sexual harassment limb that, you know, he can't control it.
Who's this a funeral for?
Men.
So she channeled her pain.
Damn it! One of them got out. Get him!
But she's considering giving the male gender a reprieve. Since the Me Too and Time's Up movements began, she says, the culture on set has shifted.
People are less tolerant of it. And I have a friend that was on set recently, and she said, you know, there was a guy on set that was completely inappropriate, and people said something, and he was fired.
This is one reason why. I'm standing right in front of the massive headquarters of the union, which represents more than 160,000 entertainment industry professionals. Right now in this building, somewhere up there, hundreds of senior guild members are taking a workshop on preventing sexual harassment. Earlier this month, the Guild issued a code of conduct that covered sexual harassment and set up a hotline to report breaches. On a few recent red carpets in LA, I asked around, is it making a difference? Actress Yvette Nicole Brown says before it felt as though there was little anyone could do to stop a man engaging in what she called a reign of terror. Not anymore.
There's always been codes of conduct for different things. We're signing them now. You weren't always signing them.
Am I tall enough?
In her speech to the Canadian Oscar nominees, Chaudhry spoke about being thankful for being Canadian.
I could have been just like Parvana.
But she's just as thankful for the brave, outspoken women who no longer accept that their auditions should hinge on their craft and their ability to keep quiet.
It would be a blessing if, when I'm older, we won't have to talk about these things anymore.
Yeah. Kim Brunhuber, CBC News, Los Angeles.
Today on Hollywood Boulevard, near the venue for Sunday's Oscar ceremonies, a life-size statue had people looking twice and maybe thinking twice, too. It depicts disgraced mogul Harvey Weinstein in golden skin tones and flowing silk pajamas, one hand gripping an Oscar while the other seems sort of poised for action on the casting couch.
It's very in your face. It's not like an abstract, like hidden message.
People passing by stop for photos, but this is guerrilla art by two underground creators. With no permit, they had to hide Weinstein away. A neat bit of art, definitely imitating life. Weinstein has all but vanished from public view since he cast a long shadow, though, on this Hollywood ritual that's about to start this weekend. Joining me now to talk about this year's Oscar race, Adam Naiman. He is contributing editor for CinemaScope magazine and film critic for TheRinger.com in Toronto. And Jen Yamato is a film reporter with the LA Times, and she's in Los Angeles. Good to see you both.
Hi there.
We have to sort of start there, don't we? I mean, that golden casting couch is a good place to start, as is Harvey Weinstein. How is his downfall, the removal of him as a dominant force in Hollywood, how do you think that is going to impact the ceremony, the Oscars writ large? I'll start with you, Jen.
Well, I think that we have certainly this whole award season seen so much more transparency in the conversations that really began with the downfall of Harvey Weinstein. The Me Too movement, the Time's Up movement really came out of the exposure of the Weinstein scandals. So it's been something that Hollywood could not ignore all season long, which has been great. And I think we're going to see just more of that as the big night arrives finally.
And do you think, Adam, that because it's the Oscars and this is sort of, you know, the pinnacle of everything, that it's going to be a little bit different, more subdued, more in your face? What are you expecting?
Well, that's the question, right? The dichotomy between subdued and in your face. Like, on the one hand, he might be a structuring absence because no one will mention him. And Oscar season's very much been made in his image for better and mostly hugely for worse in the last 20 years. Or is he going to be a target that people are going to go at either directly or implicitly? I mean, he's a figure that gives people something to rally against. You know, he's a problem that gives people something to rally around. I mean, I remember thinking last year, wondering if it was going to be the most politicized Oscar ceremony of all time, and I think that this year might top it for that.
Yeah, and last year it was really about race and whether the Oscars were too white. And then there was that horrible moment, and I know you were there for that, Jenna. You can't even erase it from your memory when they announced La La Land, and it was actually Moonlight that won. How has that change things, or has it? Are we likely to see this year also, like, reflected in a change in terms of how Hollywood has evolved, or was that sort of a one-off?
Well, first of all, that moment wasn't horrible. I thought it was amazing.
Well, it was good TV, but
people are still talking about it. It was great TV.
Yeah.
Great television. It was so dramatic to be in the room and so surreal to feel everybody go, what is happening?
Fair.
So it was really magical to be there. I can only hope that something half as exciting and unpredictable happens this year. But yes, you mentioned the conversation around race in Hollywood and in entertainment, which was started with a hashtag Oscars So White many years ago, a couple years ago now, and I think it's still as present as ever. That solution that we have collectively been seeking and trying to push Hollywood to find has not arrived. You can see that reflected in this year's nominees, which are still kind of white. And I think we're just at the beginning of feeling the progress that might come out of that.
Okay, well, when I get to your predictions, maybe you guys can weigh in on who might win. Okay, so Adam, what has struck you as sort of the biggest difference in the campaign this year? Are people sort of being open about the fact, Get Out, for instance, are they saying we are a black film with a great black actor and a great black director and we're proud of it, and so that's, how we're campaigning, or how is it different?
Well, I mean, one of the things I think is that whereas in the past you'd have a lot of discussion about the virtues of the movie, stacking them up against each other, a lot of the pre-award stuff seems to be about which films are most and least problematic.
Right.
I mean, it was interesting to see Martin McDonagh having to do damage control for 3 Billboards, which I think he did a really poor job of, where he said, I make films for grown-ups, which immediately casts any complaints about that movie in the realm of childishness. I mean, in terms of how the movies are owning that question of, are we a movie about this issue? Are we a black movie in the case of Get Out? I don't really see people speaking about the films that way. I mean, I think in the case of Get Out, one thing that I read that was interesting is some Academy members apparently don't want to watch it just because of a prejudice against genre or prejudice against horror movies. So, but I mean, Get Out is a movie where the tensions that you're alluding to and pointing to, they actually play out in the text of the movie. You're talking about La La Land and Moonlight last year. As unfair as it is to reduce that to a white movie and a black movie, it's interesting that Get Out comes out and then those tensions are put into play in a kind of coded, allegorized way within that movie. And a lot of people are suggesting that if there's going to be an upset, it's going to be in that movie's favor.
It's interesting that the story around 3 Billboards, because it's such a good movie, and then to have that sort of overtake the conversation around it, it's a little bit unfortunate in some ways.
Well, I think with 3 Billboards, it's interesting because the first wave of critics that saw the movie, especially at a festival like Toronto, where I'm based, think one thing about it. And then when you have people seeing it a little later on, they're not seeing a different movie, they're seeing the same movie, but the makeup of that critical community and group is somewhat different than the one on the ground in Toronto.
Fair. Okay, so let's get to the idea then of
Get Out.
Yeah, same with Get Out. That's a good point. So Jen, go from there, and also who you think should win Best Picture, given all the things we've been talking about, all this sort of political stuff going on around film right now.
Oh, it's so interesting because I'm one of those ones that find 3 Billboards problematic. And it's been interesting to see this season go along with not just 1 or 2 frontrunners like last year battling it out. We have had several frontrunners come and go and rise and fall. We've had Shape of Water, 3 Billboards. There's been this late surge in Get Out support, even though as Adam pointed out, some Oscar voters apparently don't even want to see it because they don't consider it a traditional Oscar movie. But we do actually have a more traditional Oscar movie that is also about race in Mudbound. That was certainly in the conversation. Yeah, I think it'll be really interesting. I'm rooting for Get Out. Get Out is my pick. It's the one I want to see because I would like the Academy to be at a place where Get Out wins Best Picture.
Okay, Adam, I only have like 20 seconds. What do you think?
I really like Phantom Thread. I mean, I think that's a really insular movie, so I don't think it has a chance of winning this year, but that's a terrific film. And of the movies that have a chance to win, I would also like to see Get Out win, certainly versus the other movies that it's competing with.
I bet you the Academy members aren't watching it because they're scared, and I would agree with them. There are terrifying moments in that movie. All right, both of you, thank you very much. I appreciate it. You've made us think smartly about how the Oscars is going to unfold this weekend. Thanks.
Well, they've traveled to some of the most extreme corners of the Earth and sparked serious conversations about the state of our planet. And for that, BC-based photographers Christina Mittermeier and Paul Nicklin have earned a new distinction. National Geographic Adventurers of the Year. We spoke to Christina from her home on Vancouver Island earlier today.
When we first saw this animal, he was asleep, and we observed it for a long time. And when he finally got up and started walking, I just heard this gasp. Everybody was shocked.
This is one of Christina Mittermeier's most memorable shoots of 2017. An emaciated polar bear searching for food in an abandoned fishing camp.
I'm an animal lover. I suffer when animals suffer, and it was just very painful to be able to do so little for this one poor animal.
She, her partner Paul Nicklin, and their organization, Sea Legacy, posted the footage online, and then it went viral.
We got over 2 billion views, and it was published in over 300 media outlets around the world.
And the conclusion so many jumped to: this was a victim of climate change. Warming temperatures, melting ice, no way for the bear to hunt, no food.
We are all scared of climate change. We are feeling paralyzed, and I'm angry that so little is being done. And I think we just recognize ourselves in that poor animal and its pain.
That climate change was truly to blame, not everyone agreed with. But Mittermeier is used to wading into controversy. Exposing the issue of farmed Atlantic salmon covered in parasites was just one more example. But often, the broader impact is simply to offer people a glimpse into a world they would otherwise never see.
That we have this big microphone and that we can reach so many people drives us to keep bringing up all these issues, and more importantly, the solutions, all the things that we all can do every day to make our planet a better place.
Next on The National, inside the plan to drop the bomb. As the nuclear threat ramps up around the world, our David Common gets an inside look at the American team tasked with dropping nuclear warheads.
A little bit sobering at times when you start thinking about some of the things that you could be asked to go do.
More images of Russia's menacing new upgrades to its nuclear arsenal. Whether more real or more theoretical, Vladimir Putin bragged yesterday that new Russian technology will soon be able to evade any U.S. missile shield, prompting fears of a new arms race. And today, NATO's American deputy chief admitted the U.S. might theoretically be vulnerable.
In fact, the missile defense system was never designed, was never ambitious enough to try to defeat the Russian strategic offensive deterrent. It was designed facing North Korea.
And that, the Americans have suggested, is the threat foremost on their minds. North Korean unpredictability is a major element, to the point where the U.S. has ramped up its own capabilities, including using some Cold War-era giants. David Common takes us inside Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana, where a mighty fleet of B-52s is always at the ready.
All right, your airfield, whereas 3-3 is active right now.
These are busy times for America's nuclear force.
You do have a targeting pod, you are connect, you're clean exterior, you got forward center and aft rack.
While subs and siloed missiles are secretive, mammoth 8-engine B-52s are meant to be visible.
It's crew ready.
Okay. As North Korea's threats grow bigger and more frequent, these bombers, nearly a half-century old and relics of the Cold War, have been refurbished and are increasingly flying 33 hours round trip from the U.S. to the Korean Peninsula, a knock at Pyongyang's front door.
What is the nuclear capability of an aircraft like this?
So in this case, for the B-52, we can carry up to 20 nuclear-capable missiles.
Colonel Kurt Shingella says the B-52 doesn't need to be stealthy when it reaches around the world.
We can declare that we're flying it, which has its own kind of deterrence message, right? If you look at someone and say, I'm going to punch you and there's nothing you can do about it, and then you swing, there's a psychological impact to that.
The bombers have now deployed to the region, to Guam, putting them even closer if needed. Though they still practice a rapid nuclear response, these are not like the worst days of the Cold War. Nuclear missiles aren't routinely kept on planes, but the air crews, many of whom are in their 20s, are vigilant over the return of a nuclear threat and practice for it. As gargantuan as the B-52 seems, inside the crew compartment is another story.
All right, here we have the offensive compartment. It's the only place where you can fully stand.
On transcontinental missions, 8 crew stuff into this tiny space.
All right, so as we climb up, here is the pilot compartment area and the defensive compartment area as well.
Jesus, tight.
It is tight.
This is a huge plane. Why is there only this much space for people?
Right, so when the B-52 was designed, not much thought was given to crew comfort. They wanted to load as many weapons as they could, so we sacrificed crew space and crew comfort for weapon loadout.
These are your eyes outside the jet, so you can see actually what you're targeting at.
In the windowless weapons zone, it can be surreal to see what would be the last step before a nuclear attack.
So this is the switch that unlocks the weapons. To actually pickle off the weapon is this manual launch button. There's 2 modes, there's a manual and an auto, but for the most part, we use the manual launch to launch the weapon.
And Captain Leila Grenzer has pressed it in practice runs for nuclear and most recently over Iraq and Syria with conventional bombs.
What's that like?
It's pretty exciting, honestly, when you get to see the big explosion go boom.
Up one level, the pilots. In the event of a nuclear war, they and everyone on board must consent to drop a weapon.
It's a little bit sobering at times when you start thinking about some of the things that you could be asked to go do. We just hope that our deterrence is enough to prevent any kind of nuclear war in that capacity.
This makes 23 missiles launched in 16 tests.
North Korea is working on an advanced version of this intercontinental ballistic missile.
North Korea certainly poses the greatest threat.
But the North Korea threat has given new nuclear life to the aging B-52, still the largest the U.S. has when it comes to dropping bombs. They go through the steps daily, loading weapons and checking mock-ups of nuclear cruise missiles. Soon they'll be off toward the Korean Peninsula again, and they want it known. A clear strategy of nuclear readiness that's been ramping up over the past few years. David Commons, CBC News at Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana.
Our Nick Purton has been working on a story that may open your eyes to inequality in this country. The very worst healthcare in Canada is found in the north. Indigenous communities face service levels that rank with some of the world's poorest countries. Monday on The National, we'll follow a doctor on his tour of fly-in reserves and the grim reality he encounters that can lead to grave doubts.
There are times when, a patient might pass away because of, lack of access to certain services. It's hard to witness children being denied care. You sometimes go to bed at night, you wonder, how can I function in a system like that? A system that's focused to deny care. It can cause you to give up hope.
Nick's full story Monday night on The National. Meanwhile, go deeper on the stories of the day earlier in the day anytime. Subscribe to our newsletter at cbcnews.ca/The National. The National today will take you inside our journalism every afternoon.
The Halifax Comedy Festival with host Mark Pritch is back.
Thick! It is thick!
Thursday, 9:30 on CBC.
Tonight on The National, a jury in Regina has found 3 men guilty of first-degree murder in the death of Reno Lee. During the trial, the court heard that Lee was held against his will and shot dead at a Regina home in 2015. His body parts were later found buried on the Star Blanket First Nation in southeastern Saskatchewan. All 3 of the men accused in the case had pleaded not guilty. A former mayor of a small town in BC has been charged with 24 counts of sex-related offenses, some related to people under the age of 16. Until this afternoon, Luke Strimbold was also an executive with the BC Liberal Party, but the party says it learned of the charges today and that Strimbold has resigned from his position and left the party. The 27-year-old is scheduled to appear in court next month. And officials in Mexico say they found what appear to be undetonated explosives on board a ferry in Cozumel. The discovery was made just over a week after an explosion on another ferry run by the same company. In that case, at least 20 people were hurt, including several Americans. The U.S. government has since issued an alert telling Americans in the area to be cautious. As for why a ferry would be carrying explosives at all, Mexican officials say that is not clear and only that they're investigating.
Guillermo del Toro's The Shape of Water is up for 13 Oscars at this Sunday's Academy Awards. It's also a nice nod to Hamilton, Ontario. Glimpses of the city are featured throughout the film, but the backdrop isn't the only thing from the Hammer. Many of the clothes worn on screen come from one of the city's vintage clothing shops, and we caught up with one of the owners, and that is our moment of the day.
Hi, folks. I'm Nick Blogic, and this is Vintage Soul Geek. Come on in. The way the production company found us was all by chance. They were having dinner nearby, and then they walked by my store and they saw the window and they said, "Holy cow, this place is amazing." Initially, they were asking for like muted blues and muted yellows, but then Guillermo del Toro changed his vision for the film and turned it into muted greens. So we had to go back to the drawing board and find a bunch of new things for him. So watching the film was really exciting with my wife because we were trying to pinpoint like, oh, which items were ours, you know, like I think that's one of our jackets that she's wearing. Oh, those are our shoes. I'm pretty sure those are our shoes. It was kind of difficult though to figure out which pieces were ours because everything had the exact same color palette.
His enthusiasm may have had something to do with their success, I suspect. The nominations, though, for the movie costume design, one of them. So big kudos to him. And this doesn't seem to be a flash in the pan either. The owners, Nick and Connie, have also gotten calls from other productions, even working on an upcoming Netflix project, too.
And some of those clothes, they don't only belong to his wife, but her mother and the grandmother. And they were in various places in the house, which is sort of what I do with my clothes. If we're going to make a public admission.
You can open your own store if you want.
I'm close, almost. Okay, that's the National for March 2nd. Have a good weekend, everybody.
Good night.